Hello and welcome to the ADHDKC podcast, ADHDKC Conversations, where we explore topics that matter to the ADHD community. And I'm Kristen Stuppy. Today, I am excited to introduce a special guest who will be joining us for an upcoming talk on November 5th. And he is an expert in helping student athletes with ADHD thrive and has dedicated his career to helping individuals, families, and communities navigate the complexities of ADHD and related challenges. With decades of experience and a passion for making a real difference, he's someone you won't want to miss. The online event will be held from 6:30 Central Time online, and you can register now at ADHDKC.org under the events tab. Today, we're lucky enough to have him right here on the podcast for an exclusive chat. Let's dive in. So, John, welcome to the show, and we're thrilled to have you here. Let's start with your journey. What initially inspired you to pursue a career in coaching? Was there a specific moment or experience that led you to this path?
Yeah, I think it was a confluence of factors. And Kristen, thank you for hosting and having me here today. I'm very excited to do the talk with you. So I was diagnosed with ADHD as a child. And back then it wasn't called ADHD, it was ADD, it was hyperactivity. And I experienced all the peaks and valleys as a kid that when you have ADHD. And I didn't know at the time, like sort of the superpowers that people talk about, but there was a lot of stigmatization and things like that because it was fairly not as researched nearly as it is now. One of my saving graces was being a good athlete. I loved playing sports. I was decent at them. And that helped carry me through the day for a lot of those peaks and valleys in my childhood. Sort of fast forward to high school, I played 3 sports in high school each year, and then I swam competitively in college at a Division I school. So sports had always been part of my life. And but the prevailing philosophy when you graduated high school was that you grew out of ADHD, which we know that is no longer the case. And so I went to college, more peaks and valleys, but again, sports was a saving grace for me, to the work world. And I had a lot of those ups and downs too. And early 30s, a serious relationship went south, and I saw a therapist for the first time. And he had asked me about, he was doing a little diagnostic of my history. And I said, "Oh yeah, I used to have ADD." He goes, "You didn't used to have it. You always have it. It's neurological." And that sort of set me on a path, and he said, "I think you should get re-diagnosed." So I got re-diagnosed, and the diagnosis was the same. You have ADHD. I went back on medication that I went off on when I ended high school. And through a therapist I was seeing, I got introduced in the late 90s to one of the first ADHD coaches out there. And was a transformative experience. To have someone, he has ADHD, to have someone in your corner who was an expert, who was your accountability partner. You can see I'm foreshadowing a lot of things about coaching, but my experience was extraordinarily positive. And to that day, that person is we are still very close. She's a confidant of mine, a mentor, and sometimes I still use her for coaching. So it's evergreen for sure. So I had a very positive experience for coaching. It set me on a good path. And in addition to continuing to play sports as an adult in my 20s, 30s, and 40s, I also went to the sports business. So I worked for ESPN for many years in sports marketing. I worked for sports properties. I worked for sports and media and entertainment agencies. And I had a really good run. And then a few years ago, I was sort of flatlining, and I wanted to do something different in my life. And the light bulb went on for me is like coaching. I've been coached. I enjoyed the management mentoring aspect of teams I ran. Swim teams here professionally in New York City. I coached all my kids' rec league teams. So that was like all the coaching part. And then I said, well, if I married that with my experience, my lived experience with ADHD, maybe there's a new career there. So I pursued it. And I decided certification was the way to go. So I got certified at the ADD Coach Academy. I'll give them a little plug because I love them, and I think they're one of the top places to get certified. So I went through that process while doing a full-time job. I decided to pursue it, coaching full-time. So I'll talk a little bit about, I've worked with adults and I work with a fair amount of young professionals, but I knew there was something I wanted to work with students to give back, just because of my deep experiences as a student and a student athlete with ADHD. So I was able to connect with Leslie Josel, who founded over 20 years ago Order Out of Chaos, which is one of the world's premier student academic coaching organizations, companies. Started with her and started coaching high school and college students. And then I said, well, I still want to connect something to sports. So I decided, I approached Leslie and we launched a year ago the ADHD Athlete Coaching Academy, where now the majority of my students are student athletes in high school and college. Just created a program around how to support them and the different demands on their time and energy. So it's been a real, I'd say, another transformative experience over the last couple of years of deciding to be a full-time life coach, working primarily with people with ADHD and executive functioning challenges. I can see it on the other side of what I experienced as being a client, and all that we can do as coaches to support students, young adults and adults, all the different folks that I work with.
It's interesting that you use the word transformative twice, because my first experience as a parent of a child with ADHD was with a coach was transformative. I saw some coaches giving a talk at a CHAD conference, and that changed the way I parented. As a pediatrician, I knew a lot about the neurobiology and medications of ADHD, but the actual parenting component, we had failed many traditional therapy type things with my child, because the things that they ask you to do just don't work for that kind of brain. And these coaches were up there talking, and I'm like, that is it. So I've always used the word transformative when it comes to ADHD coaching. So I'm glad that you used it twice. And I know work has touched so many aspects of ADHD. Can you share maybe some of the biggest changes you've seen in how ADHD is understood and managed over the years? Because you mentioned your diagnosis as a child versus an adult.
Yeah, and I'll reiterate a couple of those points. So back, and I'm happy to date myself, it was back in the 70s. The as I said, the prevailing philosophy was that you grew out of it, right? Which we know is no longer the case. So that was very different, and something I can point to just on sort of my origin story, but also to give people some historical background. I'd also say that where I know a lot of other people in my sort of a similar path had, I'll say it this way. So I could count on the number of fingers and toes the people who I told before I went to ADCA to get certified that I had ADHD, because it was such a stigma for me, and it so affected my confidence and my self-esteem, right? First day of class on Zoom, 28 people, several people from outside the U.S. And we all, share our stories for 3 to 5 minutes. So now more than twice as many people in the first 50 plus years of my life know that I have ADHD. So I share that because that is I think a significant difference from when I first went to see a coach back in the late 90s. Now I think it's very public. A lot more people are comfortable sharing, how their brains operate, how that affects them. And sort of another difference I've seen is that, how do I put this? That I don't do, for my own practice, I basically don't really do any marketing. But people come and find me because they have that connection, shared experience, New York City, sports, or whatever it is. And I think that's a big difference too. That's not me just personally. I see that with all the folks I went through ADCA with. It's the same sort of thing. Something resonates to a group of folks out there that allows them to say, hey, I think I need coaching. Can you tell me more about it. And I hear very similar stories from many of my friends, um, many of my coaching friends. So I think those are some of the differences that I've seen, sort of how I grew up with it, how I first approached the coach, and sort of where it is almost 25 years later.
Yeah, the stigma is still there for sure.
Yeah.
As a pediatrician, when I refer people for mental health therapy or anything, there's that stigma. And there are a lot of families who just won't do that. Interestingly enough, they will go see a coach because we're familiar with the word coach. It's not as threatening. So again, the coach approach can be very helpful, but also I do think that helps kind of start to break that wall of the stigma, just allowing people to go and talk to someone who is not a therapist might be a little bit helpful there. Not that therapists are bad. I definitely think they have their place, and I definitely refer to them a lot. But for the people who need specific just life skills, executive functioning, help, those kinds of things, I do think coaching is fantastic. Now, you've been
Yeah.
involved in lots of organizations and initiatives. What has been the most rewarding part of your career so
Um, I think uh, the, the positive feedback I get um, from my clients uh, affirms, it's not about me, but it affirms about the efficacy of coaching, right? Certainly there's a connection you're making between the client and the coach and on your mental wellness team, a doctor, a therapist, whatever. But I think that when I hear that affirmation that there's a difference being made, yes, I'm a contributor to it, but also on a broader level because they sought out coaching and they're benefiting from the coaching process. I think you made some very good points. There's distinctions between coaching and therapy, and I agree with you. It's been my experience that sometimes it's easier to go to the coach than the therapist. There's a practicality to it, right? But I think that affirmation to me has been really rewarding because that's saying, like, as I said a couple of years ago, I said, oh, maybe people could benefit from my experience. And it was sort of, like the cartoon bubble. That was what was coming up. But now it starts to come to life and people do start to benefit and they are making differences in their lives and they're starting to do what they want to do and live the life they want to live. Or when it comes more down to students, right? Whatever their goals are, it'd be a better time manager, more organized, know how to prioritize. And if part of that residual effect is better grades, when you start to see those things happen I guess another rewarding part is when you see that confidence. We were talking about the stigmatization. I think that comes with that, definitely can put a dent in your confidence. It can definitely affect your self-esteem. When you see those things start to change in your clients and it's becoming, more habitual for them, that stuff really warms your heart.
it I'm sure does. And we don't do these things just to feel heartwarming and those things, but it certainly is very rewarding when we see effective changes that are happening. Can
Yeah,
you just speak a moment? You mentioned a little bit about your training.
right.
Coaching is unfortunately an unregulated industry. So can you maybe talk about how people can find a coach that actually has some certifications and background education?
Yeah, it's a very good question. That going in that it's not a licensed profession, but I also knew it was important to be certified, and I went through the due diligence of talking to the founder of ACCA, to talking to my coach, and better understanding what was important, in that process. So I quickly landed on I was going to get certified. And to your point, that was a transformative experience too. The whole coaching process. I said that first day it was like, whoa, that was a big deal for me. But going through the model that they set up at ADCA really spoke to me. And so there's practical training as a coach. You're developing that expertise around ADHD, which I think is really important. There's working with your cohort and learning from them as well. So I think there's a lot of practical experience that comes from the certification process. But also for me, there was a lot of reflection and introspection about my experience having ADHD, how I wanted to show up as a coach. And they told me this at the beginning. You might not believe it, but then it comes to fruition afterwards that, at least for me, the place where I got certified, what I learned and how I show up is not just does not just affect my coaching, but it affects many other aspects of my life. It's very multidimensional in that way. And I know a lot of the folks that I went to coaching with feel very similarly. So I think that the certification process to learn how to be a coach unto itself is very important. For me, it had a broader effect on my life. And for that, I'm just very grateful and appreciative.
So again, you used the word transformative multiple times. So it's impacted your life. For those who might be tuning in, might be new to the ADHD journey. So what's the one piece of advice or insight that you'd like to leave them with?
Wow. I don't know if there's one.
You can give two or three.
Okay. And I, I would say you're halfway home if and we're talking more about sort of like coaching and seeking out support. You're halfway home if you've already identified that's something that can be meaningful to you. And I say that to all my prospective clients, that they're already well along the way when they've identified the coach. And I would say, just continue to, be as authentic as possible, as genuine as possible, to, practice as much self-care as possible along the journey, because you can learn a lot about yourself, and some of that stuff can really hit home. A lot of the other stuff can be very eye-opening. But when, on that journey, if you're open and you're committed to the process, it can have profound changes on your life.
It's fantastic. And thank you so much, John, for sharing your experiences, your insights, and all your transformative experiences today. And for anyone who's listening, don't forget to register for the upcoming ADHDKC event on November 5th from 6:30 to 7:30 Central Time. It's online, so you can join from the comfort of your own home from anywhere. Just head to the ADHDKC.org website, click on the events tab, and find this talk. Final thoughts, John, that you have on this?
I would like to send much gratitude and appreciation to you, Kristen, to ADHDKC, Chad. I was exposed to Chad like in the late 90s. I used to go to Chad meetings in New York City at churches on the Upper East Side. So it's sort of ingrained in my brain, and the work that each chapter does, the work that Chad does overall is so wonderful, and it has such a great effect on so many people that it means so much to me to be here with you and be part of what you're doing. So I just thank you for everything.
Well, thank you very much. Chad continues to grow and expand. So there's a lot of exciting things coming. So I hope everyone can join us on November 5th. John, do you want to kind of summarize what you were going to talk about?
Yeah, we're gonna talk about sports and kids and ADHD and what parents need to know. We'll talk about the benefits of playing sports, the different sports that kids can get involved in, if they want to become competitive athletes, what that starts to look like, offer some strategies and tips and tools and techniques around what can help student athletes with ADHD and executive functioning challenges.
That sounds fantastic. I'm sure there's a lot of families who want to listen in. check out ADHDKC.org, hit the events tab, and I hope everyone can join us on November 5th. Thank you.
Thank you.